I ate just 3 foods over the last 2 years, and these 3 foods caused me to gain 35 pounds over the course of the first 18 months. But then in the last 6 months, eating the same 3 foods, I lost 32 pounds. And so the net result after this 2-year experiment was I gained just a few pounds. But I think you'll agree that my body actually changed quite significantly over this time. So I chronicled this whole journey over the last 2 years, but I'm gonna tell you everything in this video, what these 3 foods are, why I ate them, how I did this carnivore bulk and then carnivore cut, and what the final results were. Now to start, we have to rewind to 2020 when my gym shut down. It was a virus casualty. And the next 2 years, I was just doing home workouts. And I was doing my workouts every day, but it was kind of like going through the motions, and it was not a top priority. And I was staying pretty lean, like around 12% body fat. And in August 2022, after 2 years of these home workouts, I stepped on the scale and it read 151 pounds. And I hadn't seen a weight like that since like high school cross country. And right then and there, I sat down and I made a new 2-year plan. In this 2-year plan, I was going to do a carnivore bulk where I was going to eat 3 foods: beef, milk, and eggs. And I was going to do that for 18 months. And the goal was to put on over 30 pounds. And then after that, I was going to do a 6-month cut. I had done beef and eggs for the 5 years prior to that, but I added raw milk. It was the new addition to the diet for this experiment. And earlier that year, I had tested raw milk and I tolerated it fantastically. And since milk is used to grow an infant to a toddler that has immense growth demands, and I'm trying to have immense growth demands, I thought it could be a good addition to the diet. So that's why I added the raw milk. More about milk later. So the goal for the first 18 months was to put on at least 30 pounds. And the reason I set 30 pounds as my goal was it was aggressive enough to ensure consistent muscle gains over the time without doing like a dirty bulk where you just put on way too much fat. But it wasn't so conservative where I tried to stay too lean and thus not put on the muscle that I could have. Before I started, I made sure to collect all my data. I took before pictures. I got both an InBody and a DEXA scan, which were very similar. One had me at 12.2% body fat, one at 12.3% body fat. One had me at 77 pounds of skeletal muscle mass, one at 78 pounds of skeletal muscle mass. And then I also took measurements. I took waist, which was 31 inches. I measured biceps and chest and shoulders and my thighs and my calves. And the starting food plan was this: 2 pounds of beef, moderate fat beef, I'd call it 80-20 beef, 3 eggs, and 2 cups of raw milk a day, which had me at about 2,800 calories, which was probably 250 or so calories, I would say, in surplus to my baseline of where I started. And so that puts me at around roughly 250 grams of protein, 175 grams of fat, 25 grams of carbs from the milk lactose. And the plan was to just slowly and progressively increase this over time, just a little bit at a time. Now, I didn't track my macros through this. When you're eating the same thing every day, you start to be able to ballpark it pretty easily. So I just monitored my weight every day, and then I would just slowly increase the food over time. And that was the plan throughout the first 18 months of the bulk. So for example, by the end of the first 6 months, I was at roughly 3,000 calories a day, which was, again, 2 pounds of beef, 3 eggs, but then 4 cups of raw milk a day. So all I did was increase really the milk over that time. And that had me at 3,000 calories, 250 grams of protein, 175 to 200 grams of fat, and 50 grams of carbs. And this resulted in gaining 2 to 3 pounds a month consistently for the first 6 months, where I was up 17 pounds, which was maybe slightly more aggressive than I wanted to start off, but that gave me another 17 pounds I need to gain over the next 12 months. So I was more or less on pace at the 6-month mark, which is when a horrible event took place. It's February 1st, 2023. I'm 6 months into this, and I'm out on my afternoon walk before lunch, and it just so happened we had an ice storm in St. Louis the day prior, but I thought it all had melted. It had not. I slipped on some ice. I didn't fall, and it actually didn't even hurt at the time, but I did hurt my knee. And after a year, it was still hurting. So then I went to get an MRI, and that's when I got the bad news.
It's a quad tendon tear. He did not think that surgery would be of any benefit.
Torn my quad tendon. And so, as you can imagine, this led to numerous weeks, actually a couple months, where I couldn't do much of any leg training. Like, my leg day was basically calves. To kick me when I was down, this injury was actually a catalyst to the next injury. because since I couldn't do my normal leg days, I was doing upper body every day. And then I started suffering from tendonitis. So I had a few rough months of training between the 6-month and the 1-year mark. So by the 1-year mark, my total weight was up 20 to 25 pounds. So the previous 6 months was not as aggressive as the first 6 months. But at this time, my knee was starting to feel better. So I was able to pick up the leg training intensity, as well as my tendonitis was cooling off. So I made aggressive push for the last 6 months to really kind of try and maximize my muscle. So during the last 6 months, the plan was to go from 3,500 calories to about 4,000 calories. And so what this looked like was me buying the fattest grass-fed, grass-finished cow you've ever seen. And so I was doing about 2 pounds of this very fatty beef a day. Usually it was between 3 to 9 eggs, and I was doing roughly 6 cups of milk a day. So at the peak of this bulk, I was doing about 4,000 calories a day. That was about 200 grams of protein, which was actually down because of how fatty the cuts of beef were, about 300 grams of fat, and about 75 grams of carbs, which leads us into the final results for the 18-month bulk. To remind you, the goal was to put on 30 plus pounds during this first 18 months. And so I started at 151 pounds, or you can call it 153 as an average low. And at the end of this 18 months, I clocked in at 186 pounds, which is 33 to 35 pounds, exactly on track for what I was shooting for. My body fat percentage went from 12% to 19%. My skeletal muscle mass went from the 77 to 78 pounds to 86 to 87 pounds of skeletal muscle mass. And my measurements saw increases basically across the board. Now, a quick note on the muscle gain. If you were to tell me a trained person, like I've been training for over 20 years in the gym, could put on, 8 to 10 pounds of muscle mass in 18 months, I would say, nope, that's not possible unless they're using some kind of gear. And no, I'm not using any gear, no testosterone, no any anabolic, nothing, no even supplements really. I'll talk about supplements in a minute. And I also got blood work at the 18-month top of the bulk, and then I got blood work again at the end of the cut. So I will have my blood work linked below as well. But for those that think I was using something, one, I really appreciate the sentiment. I don't really think I look like that. But the reason for the 8 to 10 pounds of muscle mass is the way you really make big gains in muscle is if you're new to training, so like newbie gains, or if you've lost muscle mass and then you regain it. So there's a little bit of muscle memory. And so I think a lot of these muscle gains were muscle memory, if you will. And then the third case of gaining a lot of muscle mass is steroid use. So at this point, I'm entering the 6th month cut. And while the goal of the first 18 months was to put on as much muscle mass as possible without putting on excessive amounts of body fat, the goal of the final 6 months is to lose as much body fat as I can without losing the muscle I just put on. Specifically, my goal was to drop under 10% body fat. And how was I going to do this? Well, I was going to eat the same 3 foods. I'm going to keep protein very high. I'm going to keep training intensity as high as possible. And I'm going to gradually increase cardio and gradually decrease how much I'm eating of those 3 foods. So my step 1 was to reduce the fattiness of those steaks. Step 2 was I was reducing the milk. I was adding small amounts of cardio over time during the 6 months. And protein stayed about the same total amount of protein. But because both the carbs and the fat were dropping, the percentage of protein increased in the diet. Now to the results of the 6th month cut. I started at 19% body fat and 185 pounds at the peak. After a couple months, I dropped 10 pounds and was at about 16.5% body fat. Couple more months, dropped another 10 pounds. I was at 165 and about 13% body fat. And about 4 months or so in, I hit 12% body fat, which is significant because that is the body fat percentage when I started this journey. But there's a major difference between this 12% body fat and when I started at 12% body fat. And that difference is I weighed 10 pounds more this time, which means it's a good sign that I actually put on some muscle mass. As I got into the last month of the cut, I hit 10% body fat and I was weighing roughly 160 pounds, a little less. And then at the very end, I hit 8% on in-body, 7.9%, 8% during the last week. My ending food looked like this. I was eating leaner beef cuts, a little bit less than 2 pounds a day, more than a half pound per meal, but less than 2 pounds total for the day. Usually 3 eggs and 2 cups of milk, which kind of shakes out to about 2,200 calories, 250 grams of protein, 115 grams of fat, 25 grams of carbs. Some days in the last month, I was dropping the eggs out as well. And so that would drop me to my very slow, like my lowest calorie intake was roughly 2,000 calories, roughly 225 grams of protein, 100 grams of fat, 25 grams of carbs. And then I started the reverse diet. The reverse diet might be the most interesting part of this entire experiment. So to go back to my cardio, I started cardio when I started doing the cut, and I started doing high intensity interval training for like 10 minutes several times a week. And then it slowly transitioned away from high intensity to like longer steady state where I would do like 45 minutes on the stairs 3 times a week. But I actually cut cardio out totally the last month of the cut. And so in a way, I kind of started the reverse diet at that time. And the reverse diet is where I am dropping cardio and increasing my food consumption. And generally in a cut, I would have not stopped cardio before the finish line. I would cut all the way through like a competition. I would have done cardio all the way through the competition. But I cut it out early mostly because I was just too busy. And I thought I was going to reach my goal of 8 to 9% body fat. So I cut cardio out. I kept losing weight, hit my goal at the end of my body fat goal at the end of the last month. But then the month after the experiment, which I'm currently in the very end of that month right now, I not only stopped cardio, but I started gradually increasing how much I was eating. And guess what? I have continued to lose weight and my body fat has continued to drop. Now, I somewhat expected this because I've done this in the past a number of times, and I have kind of a theory of why this happens. And to make a long story short, it's kind of like the body's undergoing immense physiologic stress when you're doing a cut and getting to very low levels of body fat. Basically, the body thinks it's starving. But as I start a reverse diet and you get rid of the cardio and you start adding food in, the body kind of releases its stress grasp. And so a lot of times you can see like inflammation drop and weight really fall off during this time. And that's exactly what I saw. And so this month I've just continued to, step on the scale and see what my body fat is. And I dropped down to 6.6% body fat, 6.7% body fat during this time, all while doing no cardio and increasing my food consumption during this last month. But this does make sense though, because if you think about it, even though I dropped cardio and am eating more, I'm likely still at an energetic total deficit. And so combine that deficit with the body feeling more physiologically safe, and you can see interesting results. For the overall 2-year results, I went from 12% body fat to 19% body fat, then to 7% body fat. And at the 7% body fat, I actually weighed more than when I started. So a great sign of overall body recomposition, which means gaining muscle and losing fat, although I didn't do it at the same time. I gained muscle and fat, and then I lost the fat, and I did lose some muscle too. At the very end, it had me at 81 to 82 pounds of skeletal muscle mass. If you remember at the peak, it had me at 86 to 87 pounds of skeletal muscle mass. So I did apparently lose some muscle mass during the cut, but overall during the 2-year period, I was up 4, maybe 5 pounds of skeletal muscle mass. Then we can review the measurement changes, which I find really interesting. So the waist, for example, I started at 31 inches. I gained 4 inches on the waist, hit 35 at the peak of the bulk, and then dropped all the way down to under 30, 29.5-inch waist at the end. And I'll come back to that waist measurement. And then other measurements, you can look at these. I'll just mention like the biceps, for example. I started at 15.5 inches, went to 17 inches, so it gained 1.5 inches on the bicep with the bulk, but then it dropped down to 16 inches, so a total gain of 0.5 inch, which means at that bulk, 1 full inch of that 1.5 inch gain was just because of fat. The last measurement I'll mention here, and you can just look through the rest of these if you're interested. The calf started at 14.5 inches. It went up to 15 inches during the bulk, and then it came back down to 14.5 inches for no change. And I got to say that really disappointed me. 1, because my calves are terrible. But 2, with my knee injury, I was doing so much calf training and sure enough, maybe for nothing. So I thought it'd be fun also if we looked at some other progress photos. Now, my goal for the fat loss phase of this was to cut under 10% body fat. And I was thinking 8 to 9% body fat maximum. And the reason for that is I didn't want to put my body under the physiologic stress that comes with like dieting down for a competition where you're trying to get to 5, 6, 7% body fat, which is super stressful on the body. And I've done it in the past, and I thought it'd be fun if we compared some of my old competition photos to how I am doing today. The first competition I did was about 12 years ago. I was in dental school still, and it was probably the leanest I ever got. I went all out. By the end of that, I was doing hour cardio in the morning sessions. I was doing weights in the evening. I went all out and I felt it, meaning I felt the physiologic stress that comes with severe dieting, meaning it was approaching summertime and I was wearing sweats. I was cold. I had no energy. I had low mood, low libido, just very low overall quality of life. What's interesting is that during this current cut, I didn't feel any of that. The most I felt was like I was not as hot this summer as I was in the previous summer when I was bulking. So I found this picture during this first competition. This is when I was 3 weeks out, and my waist measured right at, about 29 inches then, which is very comparable to where I am now. I was at, 29 and a half maybe. So I didn't get as lean as I did during that first competition, but not that far off. Then I competed again a couple years after this first one, about 10 years ago. I was 26, 27 years old, and it was probably the best body I've ever had. I had significantly more muscle mass that I attributed mainly to lifting heavier, meaning I was doing heavy deadlifts. I was deadlifting about 3x my body weight. I was bench pressing about 2x my body weight. So I was training very, very hard. I'd gotten smarter with nutrition, and I had more mass than the first one for sure. And I think what's keeping me from achieving that body again is the injuries. So when I was lifting very heavy, I hurt my shoulder, I hurt my hip. I believe I have a torn hip labrum. I've never got an MRI on that, but all the symptoms are there for that. And so I've not been able to deadlift or bench or squat like I used to. All right, last few details. Supplements. I took one supplement during this time. That was Element, LMNT. I would put a chocolate packet in my coffee. I don't recommend doing this. Once you do it, there's no going back. Workouts. This is beyond the scope of this video, but in general, I do daily workouts. My general split was chest and tris, and then I would do back and bis. Then I would do shoulders to itself because I've been trying to bring up my shoulders for the last 2 decades. And then I would do legs on the 4th day and then repeat. But I generally work out with a lot of intuition, but I know that's not very helpful. So to put some helpful guide rails here, I would generally do, let's say, 20 working sets per muscle per week. Most of the time during this, I've lived in the higher rep ranges, meaning usually 10 to 20 reps for probably most of my sets. If you're interested in more about my training philosophy and like how to actually schedule a workout program, I would recommend checking out the RB12 workout program. It's an online program I created. It's $99, but don't buy it. Don't pay for it. I'll tell you in a minute how you can just get it for free. But it's important because it walks you through how you should do a workout. We should all have different workout plans, but there's certain principles that we should all be following. And that's what I talk about in the RB12 workout program. So what's next? Here's the plan. I am reverse dieting. And the plan is to do this for probably, I'm going to say 6 months, a much shorter period of time, to back up to 14 to 15% body fat. And really the goal is if all I do is put on the muscle lost during the previous cut. Remember, I peaked up at 86, 87 pounds of skeletal muscle mass, and now it has me down at 81 to 82 pounds. If I just get back up to that, regain that 4 pounds, and then I'm at 14 to 15% body fat, I'm at a much better place than I was at the bulk previously. And so then all I'm going to do is a shorter cut after that, and I should be overall in a much better place. And then after that, the plan is probably to do more of my typical 9-month bulks, 3-month cuts. I think that's a good ratio that focuses on making gains for 9 months out of the year. You spend 3 times as much building as you do, than the 3-month cut period. Now let's wrap this up with a quick review and then next steps. To review, 2 years, 3 foods, beef, milk, and eggs. I went from 12% body fat to 19% body fat down to 7% body fat. And when we compare the start to the finish, I dropped 5% body fat, so from 12% to 7%, while gaining 4 to 5 pounds of muscle. I would say it was a successful experiment. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate you giving the video a like. And if you are interested in trying something, this is what I generally recommend people do. I've done 90 months of carnivore right now. I recommend most people just do a 90-day challenge. And so you start with a 90-day challenge, and that basically creates your solid foundation. After that, you find your place on the hyper carnivore spectrum. That is where you individualize your meat-based diet for you. And while you're doing this nutrition, I recommend you do more of the bulk mindset, meaning you eat till you're full. You're not doing any kind of cut. You're not worrying about fat loss. A lot of times fat loss is a natural consequence of eating appropriate like this. And then you combine this with a proper workout. And this is going to get you, and most people, further than they can imagine. And then at the very end of that, if you need and desire additional fat loss, then you make the extra tweaks. And I cover all of this in the Ultimate 90-Day Carnivore Challenge. It shows you how to do the 90-day challenge. It shows you how to find your place on the hypercarnivore spectrum. And it tells you how to do advanced muscle building and fat loss techniques. And it comes with the RB12 workout program. So that is my recommended next place to start. All right, 90-day challenge. Here we go. Links below for everything. And thank you for coming along on this journey with me. It made it a lot more fun.